Hey everyone, thank you for joining us today. I am Chloe Coppett here with Exergy Energy, and we're joined by our CEO, David March. This is part of our weekly all things energy discussion to just kind of inform people about what's available and the resources that are here for them and their path to sustainable energy. So today we're going to be discussing do I need a backup generator for my business? But before we get started, I just wanted to remind everyone that this is recorded. So if you wish to not participate in that, feel free to reach out to us afterwards and we can get you the information another way. But how are you, Dave, today?
Fine. No, I was just talking to some folks in Texas, and it's still super hot down there, and grid prices are going through the roof. So it's good for business, I guess, is the way to say.
Exactly. Well, speaking of prices going up and just how, energy in general is becoming more and more expensive, it seems. Are backup generators expensive for customers, whether they want to install a new one or update any current backup system they do have?
So, I hate to be the bad tidings, whatever, right? But yeah, backup generators are expensive. That doesn't mean they're not worth it, doesn't mean they're not a fantastic value and everything else. But yes, they are expensive. And you can expect to pay anywhere from, if you think of your bill in kilowatts, anywhere from $1,000 per kilowatt to $2,000 or $3,000 per kilowatt. So they are expensive. Now, that being said, it really is there a question of value, right? And value, when you talk about a backup generator, becomes important to understand that we or you have a prejudice of how you look at things. And the value you may look at is relative to, what does this cost relative to other things in my business? How do I view this thing as like an insurance policy or something like that? And yes, it is expensive. That being said, there are things that can be done to reduce the expense. So there's a way you can structure the deal to get investment tax credits on it, or you can purchase it as a service rather than putting the CapEx up. So when people say, is something expensive? And I always say, yes. I say that one of the reasons I say that is it's not something that they would normally buy, right? So it's not something you would normally buy for your business or whatever. Anything is going to seem expensive because it's something that, and I don't mean this in a negative way, you don't want to do. Right? I really don't want a backup generator. I may need one. I don't necessarily want one because it's money that could be better used in my business. So that's why they're expensive, because it's money taken away from growing your business or growing your customers, new products and things like that. So they can be expensive, but they can be a great value when you really dive into it. And if you work with some people like Exergy and things like that, there's things we can do to make them much, much, much more affordable going forward.
Yeah, definitely. For example, one of our features is the no upfront CapEx solution that we provide to people. So I guess that's a great way to kind of reduce the stress of making the decision, which makes me curious, do most organizations have backup power in place because that's just something that is installed when you're building a building? Or what causes organizations to consider backup power, whether that's installing or updating it?
Well, you sort of answered part of the question with do buildings and things have it? Many, on a percentage basis, the vast, vast majority of buildings, facilities, and companies out there do not have backup power.
Okay.
There are ones there where it is mandatory for them to have it. So they can't run their business without it. And think about a hospital or something like that has to have what's called life safety backup. You may be in manufacturing or a commercial building or something like that. You have to have backup power for your fire pumps, just in case, the outage, you're on fire, that type of thing. So there are a variety of cases where it is mandatory to have a backup generator, and it typically is really about life safety. That being said, reality is most desire for a backup generator is event driven. So people never think about a backup generator until something bad happens. So there's an outage and it causes all kinds of problems and consternation and everything else. And the first thing they say is, hey, we need a backup generator. And that's great. The problem then arises is they start looking at it and they go, okay, we had this outage. It was a big problem. How much does one of these things cost? Goes back to, gee, these things are expensive, right? So then they start looking at it immediately from a financial perspective. And that tends to narrow people's minds a bit. So they'll go like, okay, well, we just had this outage. It was a real pain in the butt, but how much did it really cost us? Well, we were down for, X number of hours and everything else, and our revenue is this, and we divide that, it comes out to this. And then they go, okay, and then how many times have we been down? See, it's pertinent or poignant because they've just been down. When they look back and say, yeah, we really don't have this problem so often, and everything else. And then they kick it down the road until, it's like, well, we'll put it in the next budget cycle and things like that. So between that event and the next budget cycle, if they haven't had another outage, then when it gets into the budget cycle, it's like, hey, we have to, manage our capital budget. Is this really going to drive our business and make us, grow and everything else? And hey, have we had any other outages, right? So it gets kicked down the road until the next outage, right? At which point, then they kick themselves and said, gee, we should have done this, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one of the biggest challenges is it doesn't get a focused thought process on it. It's driven by these events. And the thing we know about events is the pain you felt declines rapidly with time, right? So right after the outage, it's like, oh my God, this was such a problem. Oh, I never let this happen again. A couple of months after that, the memory has faded. Like, yeah, that was really a problem. We really should do something. A year later, it's gone down and down and down from there as well until the next one happens. And that's just sort of basic human nature. The other thing that becomes really interesting is how people categorize pain. So an outage that lasts for, I'll call it a significant period of time, that may be several hours or days or something like that, that is in a different category to short-term outages. Like, hey, I've been, the power went out for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, right? Those get forgotten even faster, right? Because they recover relatively quickly, they get their stuff done, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And though they may have multiples of those occur fairly frequently, they don't emotionally have the same kind of impact. They know about it. And when we talk to customers, they'll say, oh yeah, we get a 30-second outage or 2-minute outage every month or something like that. And it's really a pain and it causes all these problems. Well, why haven't you done anything? Well, because again, it's expensive, that type of thing. So what causes people to do it? It's an event. Okay. It's really an event. Now, that being said, events are becoming much more frequent than they used to be. So looking back is a prescription for disaster. The number of outages and the frequency of outages has increased 14-fold in the last 10 years. And all you have to do is watch the news, and every utilities out there is warning about potential outages this summer, extreme weather, curtail, turn your air conditioner down or something like that. So it's becoming more and more prevalent and likely you're going to have, I'll say, that pain. So what we're trying to get people to do is not wait for a bad thing to happen, but grab onto it now and be prepared, right? Don't be scared, be prepared, and think about it ahead of time.
Definitely. And you brought up something that I wanted to circle back on. You had mentioned how utilities are more and more asking residents and businesses to curtail their energy usage, which reminded me of demand response programs that we've worked with for some of our customers. And is that, aside from maybe the pain, the pain that is caused by an event that leads someone to look into backup power solutions, would you also say it's a good opportunity for people to consider backup power solutions for just the sole cause of the benefit that they can get from participation in utility incentive programs? And, when it comes back for their budget meeting, it makes more sense because they're making money off of it now.
Reality is it's a cost. It's always going to be a cost. We can reduce that cost almost to the point in some areas of the country. We can reduce that cost till it's negative, meaning it actually is a profit center. But let's be very candid. The customer is not in the energy business. They're not a utility. They're not in there to sell power. We can help them reduce the cost dramatically by participating in things like demand response and things like that, and make it much, much more affordable and palatable. And yes, they're doing their good, citizen thing and everything else. Reality is they want to run their business. How does it affect their business? And trying to convince them to look at it like it's a profit center isn't, because they don't look at profit from something that isn't their business. If I'm a bakery or something like that and saying, yeah, but you can make money over here, they go, yeah, but that's not my business, right? And I don't understand how to make money over there. We'll do that for them to reduce their cost, but the reality is the backup generator has to be there to support their business, not to support the grid. The grid will pay you to support them, but that's not the reason to get involved. The reason to get involved or get a backup generator is to support your business.
Got it. So just, from my understanding and for the audience, it sounds like the biggest issue that keeps people from investing in backup power solutions is the financial cost of it, or are there other factors that you would say come into play?
It's two. One is it expensive? Yes. So it is the cost, and they have better things to do with their capital. But also because it is sort of outside of their normal business operations, they don't think of it in the context of their business operations. Let me explain what I mean by that. They look at it strictly as a cost. So the first thing they do, and we did a webinar on this, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, like what's the cost of going down and things like that. So the first thing people think of is, oh, we went down. What did it cost? How often do we go down? What does the generator cost, et cetera, et cetera. So as soon as you put it in dollar terms, you tend to narrow your vision of the implications of an outage. And what we're trying to convince people or get people to realize is financial numbers, the quantification is the second part. Let's look at the implications first. So what we recommend people to do is like, do I need a backup generator? Start with the priority list of what's most important for your business. And not from a financial sense, though it all eventually ties back to finance, but from a categorical sense. So what's the most important to your business? Employees, customers, quality, those things are the most important. Make that list, prioritize that list, and then go back and ask yourself, what happens? What is the implication of an outage on that category? So let's look at it from people, right? The number one, people, employees. What does an outage do? Well, think of all the implications. One, is there a safety issue? If the power goes out and it's dark and everything else and people fall or get cut or something, gee, I need something, at least emergency lighting or something like that. How does it affect our employees as a function of time? Like, hey, if I'm out for an hour or two, is that very disruptive to their life? Or if I'm out for a day and I've got to bring them in on the weekend in order to make up work because of my order book and things like that, how does that disrupt my employee base? What does it do to morale, that type of thing? So think about all of the implications. Now, you can't always put financial numbers to it, but first understand it. I mean, so we could take the extreme example. What happens? I mean, I'm a nursing home, right? And power goes out and I have people on life support. Well, if I don't have a backup generator, they die. Well, that's the reason why you asked. Some organizations have to have backup generators, but what if the power goes out? It's 95 degrees, and they're ambulatory and everything else. What do I do? I mean, I can't let them sit in 95 degrees for several days or something like that. Do I ship them to another facility? Do I send them to the hospital? Do I call their families and have them pick them up? Lots and lots of implications there. So understand the implications on people. And one of the people to understand what the implications are what your customers. What is the implication on your customer? And again, the reason we say do it first categorically rather than financially is when we default into, I missed some shipments or something like that. How much what lost revenue did I have? Boom. That's the cost. How does that compare to the cost of generator? Well, take it the next step. If I miss a shipment with a customer, what does that do to my customer relationship? If you want to, look at the most expensive cost in a business, it's customer acquisition. It's 3 times more expensive or more to acquire a new customer than to maintain and satisfy a current customer. So if you think about, hey, an outage, how does that affect my customer? And will my customer now change their relationship with me, potentially look at competitors and things like that, and I were to lose that customer, I've got to find 3 more to make up for that one that I lost. So again, think through categorically, what are the implications? And again, back down and you get into your production process. If the power goes down, what are the things that happen? Get your production people in, like, hey, if the power just dropped out, what happens? And then, they'll go, well, we'll get this scrap, we'll get this and everything else. But again, go ask the question. Okay, what about the people? What are we doing with them? Are we sending them home? Are we paying them for the day? What are all these implications? So again, first thing, make a list priority-wise of what is most important to your business. Think of it as the success factors of your business. Then go back and ask, what happens in each of these cases if there's an outage? And then, and who does that impact? What are those implications? And then, unfortunately, you have to take the next step. And the next step is, what does it mean as a function of time? If I'm down for an hour, what does it mean? If I'm down for a day, what does it mean? If I'm down for a week, what does it mean? Now, statistically, you're not necessarily going to be down for a week frequently. You may not even statistically be down for a day frequently. But what is the implication for being down a week? So if you're down for a week over, within a 5-year period of time, what would those implications be? And how much would it in fact cost you and cost your business and things like that?
Yeah, and you make a really good point. It actually reminds me, and I can't remember the exact details, but it was a distributor that we've worked with in the past where, a car hit a utility pole, I believe, and the power went out, and they would have missed their shipment for Christmas Day, and it would have impacted their customer base and their relationships. And and they had no interruption to their power because they had the backup power, in place.
You know what, Kelly, I'm glad you brought that one up. It's a perfect example. So it was a distributor, distributed, food and beverage and things like that. This was just before the Christmas holiday. We got a call. It says our generator's running. Why is that? And we go, well, is there an outage? They go, we have no idea. So I said, well, we'll check. And we have an outage monitor system, and it's on our website, free to everybody. If you want to go see who's out of power in the country, you can go to our website. So we actually contacted the utility and things like that, and yeah, a car or a truck hit a telephone pole or utility pole, but just on their block. There was only 2 people that were down, and one of them was this big, customer distributor. And then again, if you look at it and you go, hey, on a pure financial basis, oh, we didn't make that shipment, right? Didn't make that shipment. What was that shipment worth? $1 million, whatever. You divide it through what is the generator cost, blah. But they didn't make the shipment to their customer, who wouldn't have the products that the people were coming to get for Christmas, for the holiday. What was that customer feeling at that point, right? And it's like, so there's this cascade effect. Not making that shipment to ABC, in that context, ABC suffered significant brand damage because the customer, the end customer came in to buy his, whatever it is, Christmas victuals or something like that, and it wasn't available. Who are they blaming? Are they going to blame the food distributor? They don't even know who the food distributor is. They're going to blame that particular store and say, I'm not shopping with these guys again. At least I'm not going to do it, before the holidays or something. So one of those things, I guess you could say, when I say put the priority list down of what are the successes to your business, brand protection is huge. And so, for example, a lot of large food producers will require their distribution warehouse, vendors and things like that to have backup generators, full facility backup generators, et cetera, because they don't want to take the risk that if something were to happen, it could harm the brand. And let's say it's chicken, right? You have some spoilage or something because the temperature wasn't maintained, the shelf life therefore was reduced or something, and customers eat it, somebody gets sick or something like that. They're not going to point to the warehouse vendor. They're going to point to that chicken, supplier and that store. So brand is one of the most important things to consider. A backup generator is not only an insurance policy for your operations, the health and safety of your employees and your customer relationships, but it's an important investment and insurance policy of maintaining your brand quality.
Definitely. And, actually one of the questions that I had on mind that I wanted to ask you, which I kind of feel like we've covered a lot of the basis of, is, if we're playing devil's advocate, a lot of people renting a generator, I feel as though is a very known thing that you can do, I guess, is the best way I can put it. So why not just simply rent it to save the business costs as opposed to installing it, which I know we kind of spoken on. You can't really predict an event, and then what do you do in that case? But I still want to get your opinion.
No, that's a great example. We have many customers ask that question, like, why should I own one of these things? I'm only going to use it intermittently. And sometimes, and honestly, and sometimes, hey, we could go down and it's just not a big deal. It's a slow season or something like that. We can send people home, blah, blah, blah. The problem with renting is they're in general not available when you need them. So if it was a one-off thing, right, you went down, because let's take the example, somebody hit a telephone pole and took the power out for a few buildings or something like that. Sure, you could get on the phone, call Sunbelt Rentals or something like that, and I need a backup generator or whatever, and they'll come out. But let's take the other example is we got a hurricane come through. We had a flood. We had something like that. Everybody needs a generator, and they're just not available, literally just not available. I'm up here in Washington, D.C. One of the largest dealers of rental generators and stuff is in our area. Hurricane season, most of their stuff gets shipped down and they rent them out down in, the Gulf Coast and things like that. So if you had something happen up here, not necessarily going to be available. So then you ask, all right, well, what if I reserve one Okay. Meaning like, hey guys, I'm going to need one, but I really don't want it on site. Why don't you hold it for me? But you have it for me when I need it. That's called buying it at a much higher price, right? You'll spend maybe 3 to 4 times as much. Essentially, you're renting it almost for every day of the year if you want to be sure that it's absolutely there at that time, right?
Right.
Other way is you could say, okay, the season I'm worried about is, hurricane season, June through October. I want to make sure that I have one available. I'm going to, have a rental thing, and I'll guarantee them. But you're renting it for that entire period ahead of time. And if the hurricane doesn't happen and you don't use it, then you don't get a refund, right? Because they held it essentially for you. So
Right.
rentals are in general not attractive financially. And I'm going to give you an example. A natural gas 1 megawatt rental will be somewhere in the order of almost $20,000 a month. 20,000.
Wow.
Okay, now that's a lot of money. $20,000 a month, that's $240,000 a year. What would that have cost you had you purchased it? Well, 1 megawatt generator, let's call it $1,200 a kilowatt. It's $1.2 million. Well, 240,000 a year, 20,000 a month, compared to 1.2 megawatts. It's like what a 5 year, right? It's a 5 year payback, which in general is not within the realm of what people want, what businesses want. In general, businesses say if it doesn't pay for itself in 2 years, we can't do it. That's not this kind of an investment. This is insurance. It's kind of like saying, I'm not going to buy life insurance unless I'm dying in the next 2 years or something. Yeah, it's not the way
Right.
it works. So the thing that happens, and we see this fairly frequently, somebody will rent a generator. They're going to say, oh, we're really, really worried about this hurricane season. And they rent it. And and they start renting it. And then the end of hurricane season comes around and they go, well, we could ship this back, but then I got to rent it again. So then I basically have to pay up front because they're going to go and rent it to somebody else. And then they have to deinstall it, decommission it, bring it back. And I'm just going to keep it. Okay.
Mhm.
So they end up
Right.
keeping it, which was a one-time short-term thing. And now they have it for years. We've talked to people who've been renting generators at $20,000, $25,000 a month, and they've been doing it for 5 or 6 years.
Wow. I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah, no, and part of it is because it becomes an operating expense that then gets ignored. Right? Oh, we needed to have this. Then it gets built into the cost structure. So it doesn't come up every year like a CapEx investment and go into the budget things. It just gets built into the cost structure. So typically, though, if it's a rental generator, you're not integrating it with the grid. They're not doing peak shaving, demand response, and everything else. So in that analysis, I said, it's like a 5 year payback if it's just looking at it rent versus buy. But in the buy
Mhm.
situation or energy as a service, um, a knowledgeable organization can get you into grid programs and things that could cut that cost in half. So you're looking
Mhm.
at, and especially if you do things like renewable fuels and stuff, and get an ITC, you can that payback period versus the rental could be as little as 2 years, which is basically the slam dunk. You ought to buy it if you're thinking of renting one.
Most definitely. I guess my main question is that I feel as though most generators that people currently have um, are diesel generators. I see all the time generator, people that supply the gas for
Mm-hmm.
generators, and usually diesel gas distributors and other sources of fossil fuel. And with the transition to renewable resources that a lot of local and state governments are implementing on businesses and just, I guess, states in general, are there alternatives for people? Obviously they don't want to buy something that they might not be able to utilize in the future because it doesn't meet the requirements?
Not sure I quite understand the question. Let's break it into two types. You got diesel and say natural gas or and propane. Diesel generators in general are less expensive, significantly less
Okay.
expensive than natural gas generators. And there weren't that many natural gas generators available until, several years ago or things. So about almost 90% of what's installed out there are diesel generators. Now, that being said, most of those are not eligible to participate in grid programs. They don't have the emission controls and things like that. So they are what's called emergency backup only.
Okay.
Right? So they're inexpensive. They're typically what are called tier 2, tier 3, and they can run at a maximum 100 hours a year in non-emergency. You can run it as long as you need to if the grid's down and it's an emergency, but you can't really use them for anything else. Natural gas generators, because of their emissions, are much, much lower, and the cost to generate is much lower. And I'll give you some examples in just a second. Those can participate in grid services, demand response, block index trading, peak shaving, and things like that can substantially reduce the effective costs on it so that you get the benefits of natural gas at almost the same cost as diesel. Now, if you wanted to participate in grid programs with diesel, you could do that, but you're doing that through what's called Tier 4 Final, which is a much, much more extensive emission controls and everything else. A Tier 4 Final diesel generator will be as expensive, if not more expensive, than that natural gas generator. So, why not go to natural gas if you can, if you got natural gas on site? The reason, even if they were of same price, the cost to generate is radically different. So at current gas prices, natural gas prices, fuel cost to self-generate is about 3.5 cents. And if you put O&M and everything else, you can generate for 5.5 cents a kilowatt hour. If you're looking at diesel, it's going to be more in the low to mid 20 cents per kilowatt hour. So the CapEx is the same. The maintenance on diesel is higher. The cost to generate is substantially higher. So we very, very much suggest, if you can and you have the natural gas available nearby, go with natural gas. Less problems, less maintenance, and a lot more economic.
Understood. What about solar and battery? I feel as though, I see everywhere ads for, solar power and whatnot. But if I understand correctly, there's not a long-term storage solution for that, correct?
Yeah, that's one of the
In terms of the reliability, if you need it,
yeah, that's one of
if the grid.
the unfortunate sort of confusions in the market is they talk about battery and then they'll say, and it can be used for backup. They are absolutely correct, but the reality is that the backup that a battery can provide might be an hour or so. And remember, when we talked about go through your priorities, okay, and then go through your implications and then go through your times, right? So I have an outage, it's less than an hour, okay, a battery could handle it. It's more than an hour, it's a day, can't do it with a battery and everything else. So if you have issues, if your implications for a longer outage are very substantial, then a battery isn't going to help you. It literally is not going to help you because, if you're going to be down for days, you're down for days if you don't have a generator.
Right.
So sometimes I get a little upset that people are overselling batteries as being partially for backup. And that is coming more and more from sort of the residential side. So you can buy a Tesla Powerwall, right? And store that and all that kind of things. And it will handle enough for a house, for a day or so. That is fantastic. Huge supporter of that. All that kind of great stuff. But a household's consumption is really, really different than a business. But let's take, a nursing home or a hospital. Is what if it's more than a day and I can't? How do I recharge this thing? If I can't recharge it, I'm still out of luck, and I'm going to have to evacuate my people and things like that. So for most
Right.
businesses and organizations, we don't see battery as very, very helpful. Now you mentioned solar plus battery. So people think of like, well, yeah, but the sun will come out and recharge my battery and all that kind of stuff. Again, fantastic idea. A couple of things to understand. Number one, um, it's a bit more complex technically because the way a solar inverter works is it looks to have the the grid there. If the grid drops out, the inverter shuts down because it can't backfeed to the grid. So you have to have then a specific controller that allow that solar to go to the battery. It can't go to your load directly. It's like you can't power your house off of solar alone without a battery because it's
Mhm.
too intermittent and things like that. So it becomes more complicated to have a solar plus battery. Now, that being said, let's assume again that you've had a blizzard or something, you've drained the battery, and the solar is now it's all covered with snow, or we've got cloud cover or something like that. How do you recharge it? Um, we did a video series on batteries versus backup generators. In that is an analysis of solar plus battery and battery only versus generator and the cost differentials. And it really does come down to time. And again, to give an example, if I had a 1 megawatt load, sort of over flat for all 24 hours, 1 megawatt for all 24 hours, I could put let's say a natural gas backup generator in there for, let's say, round numbers, $1 million. If I wanted to do the same thing and that $1 million will let me run for weeks on end. We did a statistical analysis. If I wanted to be 99% sure I could outlast any outage that came up, I would need to have at least 118 hours of 1 megawatt. So when you work out the numbers, what would that cost in batteries? It would be $34 million. So do you want to
It's
spend a
insane.
million on a natural gas or you want to spend 34 million for the battery? We looked at that also. Like, what if I had solar, charging the battery? There's a couple of problems there. One is for most businesses, their power consumption is much greater than the footprint they have available to put the solar in. So they can only solar generate a portion for most companies, a portion of what they need. So it's not going to recharge the battery the whole way through. Then you have the intermittency. What if it's raining? What if it's cloudy and everything else? But one of the biggest things is that not only is solar diurnal, meaning like I get a lot of it during the middle of the day and I get nothing in the middle of the night, it
Mhm.
changes dramatically across the year. So if my outage was in the middle of summer where I have a lot of sunlight time and things like that, I get a lot of recharge. But the solar production will fall to 40% or 30% in the middle of winter. So now, if my load's the same, I have an outage, my battery takes my solar would take 3 times longer to recharge it. So if I wanted to have that as a true backup, my size of the solar would need to be 3 to 4 times larger. And then I throw most of it away or I have to sell it to the grid during the summertime. So again, in
Mhm.
general, if you're really talking about resiliency and outage management, solar and solar plus battery is not a viable solution for most folks. And again, I recommend go to our website under resources, videos, batteries versus backup generators. It goes through it in detail and quantifies it in numbers based on the most recent NREL studies on the costs of all these factors.
Got it. Well, I just to recap and kind of end our conversation, if you had to, I guess, rank the reasons for backup generators, what would be those priorities, or is there a checklist that people can kind of go off based on?
Yeah, if you're interested, write to us, call us, go to our LinkedIn, comment, and say, yeah, I'd like a checklist. what again we try and do is we want people to think through the implications by category of their business and not jump directly to financials. Because if you jump directly to financials, you will immediately ignore some of the biggest costs, like customer relationship, safety, and screwing up people's schedules and things like that. You're like, well, it doesn't have a cost associated. Yes, it does. Right.
Right.
But they'll gravitate initially to, well, what's our revenue per year? Divide that by 8,760 hours. It's this much an hour. How long were we down? That's what it costs us. Got to think these implications through. So if you want some help on that, absolutely, we'll send you a checklist. It's more just a guide for your thought processes. Think of these things through. It's more like a checklist. Did you think of it, and what are the implications? So glad to help in any way we can.
Yeah, definitely. And and you've already pointed out in the beginning, but for anyone that wants to visit our website, there is a plethora of free informational resources for people to just be informed of what's going on in the energy market and how that's going to impact their business. That's there just to support businesses in this energy market, because no one starts a business to manage their own energy or worry about their backup power solutions. So feel free to check out our website. And then, like Dave said, reach out to us or comment if you would like that checklist or just want to speak more about your individual business needs. But also in the meantime, we do have this weekly session every week, just again for general information about the energy market and all things energy. So feel free to join us every week. It's a different topic every week that we try to cover. And if you guys have any ideas or any topics you'd like us to dive into, also feel free to let us know.
And you don't have to listen to me all the time. This has just been most busy. I think it's because it's summertime. We typically do interviews with executives of other, technology, market things, stuff that we believe is beneficial to you to help you better manage your business. Chloe, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time. And I look forward to seeing you next week.
Take care. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.